have a brief introduction, or brief summary to my text. I'm pleased to welcome the colleagues gathered today, Ilyenkov scholars and experts. His daughter, Elena Illesh, has asked me to convey her greetings and wishes for a fascinating discussion. The report I have submitted in text form gives a brief summary of one of such discussions some 15 years ago. Since then, the conception of thinking body has gained many new supporters. Just yesterday, I came across a new book, Denken de Körper, by Daniel Neumann, which mentions Spinoza in its title and Ilyenkov in the text. In my youth, I too adored Ilyenkov's Spinoza with his thinking body. Over time, due to Ilyenkov and Spinoza, I developed a more adequate conception of thinking. But this doesn't mean that I consider the essay 2 of dialectical logic completely inadequate or spoiling the book. Absolutely not. It seems to me that a couple of painless plastic operations could turn everything said there in a pure truth. One just have to replace thinking body with feeling body and ideas with images of senses. As a result, I suppose Spinoza too could easily subscribe to this text. The difference is that sensual images are modes of the attribute of extension and not of thought. The images express reality in forms of space and time, not sub specie eternitatis. I must say that I'm referring exclusively to natural sensual images, which animals have as well, and not to ideal images of art or, say, mathematics. Spinoza called cognition by means of sense images imagination and contrasted it to the intellect. In his treatise on the emendation of the intellect, we read that, I'm quoting, those activities by which imaginations are produced happen according to other laws, wholly different from the laws of the intellect. It is also established how easily they can fall into great errors who have not accurately distinguished between imagination and intellection. Exactly such a great error occurred in the essay 2 on Spinoza. I want to emphasize that Ilyenkov himself never made the same mistake as his pseudo Spinoza. He always stressed the difference between sensory perception and logical thinking, imagination and intellect, according to Spinoza and Spinoza's terms. And of course, Ilyenkov himself would never call the natural sensual image an adequate idea. All the ideal is born, according to him, in the process of human labor, in the work of the hand, transforming the natural form of the thing, rather than in the movement of the eye or limbs of the body along the spatial contours of things. The body is not a subject of thinking, but merely an organ, an instrument, so to speak, a violin on which the music of ideas is played. And this violin cannot play alone. It requires the whole ensemble of social relations. Human thinking is always a collective social process that has nothing to do with the process of scanning the contours of external bodies as it is described in essay 2. That is all I would like to add to what has been written. If there are any questions left, I'm ready to answer them.
Thank you very much, Andrey. Okay, so do we have questions about Andrey's text?
Thank you very much.
I guess, okay, so
explain why he called it private? The title, why he gave it the title?
Oh, so the question was,
Saving private life.
you called it saving private Spinoza. Why? What did you mean? In what way is it saving Spinoza?
I think that Spinoza deserves much better destiny, deserves to be understood in its own sense, not as a materialist of such a primitive type, which confuses sensual images with adequate ideas, or scanning the contours of external things with thought, with thinking process. Spinoza was not a materialist of such a type, I suppose. We need to save Spinoza from the misunderstanding in the essay too.
Right. And Ali, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I'm trying to pull out my headphones. Andrey, many thanks for the talk and the paper. In fact, my question is not directly related with your paper, but it's of course related with Ilyenkov and thinking. My question, which I cannot yet understand from what I read from Ilyenkov, is the change of the courses between thinking and the class struggles. As you know, Gramsci has a theoretical framework, hegemony, how the class struggle manifests itself in cultural domain, as interpreted by the British cultural studies colleagues. But I am fascinated with the model of Ilyenkov in terms of his dialectics of the ideal and about solving the dualisms, many dualisms, both in Marxism and Western thinking. But I still could not find how can we apply the relation between class struggles and thinking in terms of the famous argument that the ideas of the ruling class are the dominant ideas of the related term. Sorry if it is too long, if it is very indirect. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Andrey?
Well, I don't know the direct answer to this question if we appeal to the own Ilyenkov's texts, but if some indirect connections might be exposed even in Ilyenkov's works on Spinoza. I mean his article written to the anniversary of Spinoza in 1977, not anniversary, but the anniversary of his death, where Ilyenkov said that Spinoza was an ideologist of proletariat, because not of bourgeoisie as was considered in Soviet official studies of Spinoza. Because Spinoza was a man of labor, he grinded lenses by his own hands, and his ethics, as Ilyenkov expressed it, his Spinoza's ethics is a codex, is a code of moral axiomatics of proletariat. So not class struggle, but at least class orientation of Spinoza's text were mentioned by Ilyenkov.
Many thanks, Andrey.
Sit in the seat with the.
Yeah, the closer you are, the better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello there, Andrey. First of all, thank you very much for the work you've done. It's been really terrific. Just reading it and you know, just trying to absorb it all, including this last paper. But the question that I'd like to ask is that I studied Spinoza basically on the, if you like, on the recommendation that I got from Ilyenkov in dialectical logic. This was way back in the 70s, the late 70s and the 80s. And but what I found was that it doesn't quite fit, because the Soviet interpretation of Spinoza is that you can run the concept of substance together with a concept of matter. They saw it as equivalent, and therefore thought was an attribute of matter, so to speak, in Spinozan language. But in fact, that's not actually how Spinoza himself presents it. And if you look at the metaphysical structure of part one of the ethics, is a layered structure of substance, which is the same thing as the attributes at the top. But then you've got the infinite modes, the immediate infinite mode and the mediate infinite mode. And then you've got the finite modes of the things of this world. And so what is actually called matter in a Soviet context would actually be one of the modes, possibly one of the, even if you think of it in terms of the whole cosmos, you know, the face of the universe, I think, is an expression that Spinoza uses, but that means one of the infinite modes. It doesn't mean substance. And so there's a kind of discontinuity, a misfit between trying to force Spinoza metaphysics into the Soviet idea of dialectical materialism. So,
Thank you. As far as I can hear, I'm trying to answer the question about substance and matter, these two concepts. I think that all materialists of all times understood matter as substance, but it is a problem if we can interpret Spinoza's substance as matter. As simply, Spinoza himself called matter only extended substance, only extension. But substance as such is nature, natura naturata, is nature in nature. Well, so I think formally Spinoza is not a materialist, though we can interpret his theory in a materialist way, as it was done in Soviet times by Deborin and his school, and partly even by Ilyenkov himself. Ilyenkov thought that nature, substance, and matter for Spinoza is all the same, is equivalent.
thank you very much.
Thank you. So there's a question in the chat from Carl. Do you want me to read it out loud, or
I so want material. I'm not sure that Aristotelian concepts like formal cause or material cause, this distinction is appropriate to express express the core of the Marxian statement that labor is subject of thought. Labor is a process, so it is not subject in a formal logical sense, I suppose. It's a process as a subject and body as an instrument. It's very informal understanding of the relation between between subject and predicate. So we need another logic to understand the concept of labor, the practical materialism, as Marx and Engels called it. We need this reformation of logic to understand the Marxist stance in this question. So.
Okay, so David, then Yanis, and if there's anyone we haven't heard from in this conference, it would be great to have any comments or questions from David.
Do I need this?
Of course.
Okay. Hi, Andrei. Very good to see you. So I just wanted to just emphasize a couple of things which are really in your paper, I think. At the end of the paper, you're quite critical about the way the idea of the thinking body is being taken up. And I mean, I think the idea is, it can be very rich, but it needs two things. So the one Ilyenkovian theme is that his famous slogan that the brain doesn't think, the person thinks with the help or by means of their brain. And then if you take that view, then you ask what are persons, and persons are embodied or bodily beings. And so there's a sense in which the thinking thing is a bodily being. But then you have to add to that this further thought about the body, what the body is, and then this notion of the physical body being essentially related to what Marx calls the inorganic body of man, or what Ilyenkov often calls man's spiritual culture, and so on. That is absolutely critical. And once you make those two adjustments, you've got those two things in view, then the notion of the thinking body, I think, is redeemed and can have a life.
Well, nice to see you, David, too. And it was very difficult for me to follow the fluent English speech and even some. So I probably cannot understand the core of your question. So maybe somebody can write down the question.
I can. It's going to take. Yeah, maybe I'll try.
If you want to type it there, then Yanis can.
Okay.
Yeah, ask his question. Yeah. Andrei, David's just typing it, but Yanis wants to ask the question.
Hello, Andrei. Thank you very much for your talk. I would like to ask you to tell us a bit more about the conception of Ilyenkov of Spinoza from the point of view of dialectical and Hegelian approach. Because as we know, in France, for example, Spinoza was used to fight against dialectical approach. Spinoza was one of the philosophers who was used to fight Marxism. But Ilyenkov is the opposite. Ilyenkov uses creatively Spinoza and combines with him with Hegel. So my question is, tell us a bit more about this Ilyenkov's approach, the combination of Spinoza and Hegel. That's my point.
Okay, a very good question, but very voluminous, very very long answer is needed. But if briefly, I can say that Ilyenkov, in some respects, appreciated Spinoza even even better than Hegel, and it can exactly in the question of the relation of hand of body to mind, body mind problem was resolved by Spinoza more effectively, materialistically than Hegel did it. And so Hegel, for Ilyenkov, Spinoza was a dialectical thinker, but Spinoza's dialectics was not a type, really not of a type as Hegel's one. But the specificity of Spinoza's dialectics it is too hard item to discuss it briefly. But I think French philosophers like Tusserien school are quite they understand Spinoza very inadequately when they especially when they neglect the concept of negation in Spinoza's system, when they because we can't this concept as Hegel stressed it plays the central role in Spinoza's system, and determinatio is negatio is a very important definition, because determinatio, determination, is the process of naturing all finite things for Spinoza. Determinatio is a real, it's not only an intellectual process, it's a real process of by which God determines everything in nature, in natured nature. So I think Ilyenkov is closer in this respect, closer to truth than French Marxists are.
Thank you. Andrei, David has written his comments in the chat, so you can read that from David.
Thank you. Not only the brain does not think. I think for Ilyenkov himself, even the total human body in total doesn't think. And thinking is an attribute of an ensemble of social relations of man understood as a social creature, not as an individual, as in the essay 2. So why only brain? Why we do not take body in the whole? And if we speak about the whole body, nothing changes. in this problem. But because human body is part of a social body, is only a particle, and as such particle, it can it can think or perform any purely social, purely human operations only in contact with the social body. Yes, the second point, we need to see the body not only in unity, but as a particle that cannot do anything human in abstract, an abstraction from this social body.
Andrew?
Hello, thank you so much, Andrei, for your talk and all that you've done for the Ilyenkov community over the years. I have two responses to your paper. The first response is around the issue that you have of the thinking body being individualistic. So one of your criticisms is that it's individualistic, like Hobbesian, although you don't put that in this paper. So what I tried to do yesterday, with you in mind, actually, and your critique about individualism, is set out a parallel between Ilyenkov's starting point in chapter 2 that we're talking about of the thinking body, the individual thinking body, and you can think of the individual commodity in Marx's Capital as a similar kind of starting point. So I tried to set a parallel out. You start with a commodity, you go to money, you go to capital via value in Marx's Capital. With Ilyenkov and dialectical logic, you start with a thinking body, but you end up with an ensemble of social relations. Labor and thought is an attribute of labor, much as you. And so when you say that Ilyenkov corrects himself when he gets to labor, I see Ilyenkov as having developed from an earlier starting point to labor, similarly as Marx develops from the commodity ultimately to get to capital. Anyway, I know, I'm sorry I couldn't write anything down, but I think that's an interesting parallel, and it helps to think about the issue of individualism. When you think, well, Marx doesn't mean the individual commodity. It's not like one commodity. It's not an individualistic. It is also the case that in the debates on value theory in Marx, you have criticisms which are precisely saying, making what I would consider to be a mistake. They're thinking that the commodity is an individual commodity, and that commodity exchange that Marx is thinking about is an exchange between one individual and one other individual. He's not. He's thinking about all the commodities in the whole society as a specific ensemble of social relations. Because that's the point about individualism. Your other really important point is about the problem of thinking of acting along the contours of a body. Here, I just want to say, there's a really important distinction. What Ilyenkov is saying is it's not being self-aware of acting according to the contours of a body. It's being self-aware of the mode of activity according to the contours of the body. So it's not the activity according to the body, or even worse, the action according to the body. It's the mode of activity according to the body. That is important because the characteristic trait of thinking activity is universal. So precisely by being self-aware of your universal activity, you are being self-aware not of an individual body, not of an ideal image of an individual body, but of a universal. Okay, I am very sorry. There's no time to talk about this properly, but it would be great to be able to do so in an easier and with more time. Thank you.
Well, as far as I could follow the question, I agree with almost all you said. And in Spinoza was not a collectivist, of course, but he was not a refined collectivist, but he was not also the individualist like Hobbes, and Ilyenkov uses the Hobbesian metaphor of foot and walking gait to explain Spinoza's understanding of relation between thinking and body. I think it's much more closer to Hobbes than to Spinoza, but your final statement that there is some for Ilyenkov Spinoza there is some universal activity which participates in the individual act of scanning the contours of the external body or an external body. I think it's too risky hypothesis. I can't find all this in the essay too.
Thank you. Any final